Welcome to Conscious Eye, living in authentic connection and harmony with self, others, and the world, featuring Ravi and Savitri. Good morning, Ravi.
Good morning, Savitri.
Well, here we are. I'm watching snow, and we've been having more snow this year so far than we seem to have had in quite a few years. So I know not everybody's happy about that, but I have to say I really love that whole landscape of the shadows and the snow white and the flakes you go out and look at them and they're all so different and beautiful patterns. Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Mhm.
If you're going to have winter, you might as well have snow. And right, I mean, safe travels. Like, don't be out there driving around in it if you don't have to be. But it's a beautiful Saturday. I'm fortunate enough there goes my dishwasher. I'm fortunate. I thought I had everything done. Um,
You
I'm
started all
fortunate.
your automatic chores.
You do those things before you get started. It's like, I'm going to throw a load of laundry in. I'm going to get my dishes started. And then I have the loudest heating system in the world. So, you know what? What are we? We're a grassroots pod, and that's how we do.
Well, let
That's
me
how it
just
goes.
say we're welcoming everyone into our homes because
Mhm.
we are um, recording from our homes. So today we had a topic around Sattva, and it's a Sattvic holiday season.
Well, it can get crazy. We already know
Yes.
that. I mean, I was out just, a few days ago, and already the traffic, the parking lots, it's pretty bonkers out there. And it just already feels like that rush is on, and people are rushing about to wrap up, their Christmas traditions, finish their Christmas shopping. And I know I'm a last minute Sally. Um, I'll be, shopping the day of Christmas. And honestly, in our family, we've really tapered down, kind of really s stepped back from a lot of shopping and gift giving, and
Hmm.
we focus on taking the girls, my nieces and my nephew shopping. That's one of our favorite days of the year, getting lunch and just going out and spending the day with them. It's more about the time spent. If you're going to have winter, you might as well have the snow. And to me, there's not much better than being able to sit inside and watch the flakes come down and watch that winterscape form. It's so quiet and soft,
Yes.
in the snow. And it's one of my favorite times of year. Because it's about hibernation and taking it
That's
slow.
right.
And if we get
Hmm.
caught up in the hustle and bustle, it becomes very stressful. So, yeah, today we're going to talk about how to have a Sattvic holiday, and we should probably remind our listeners, or if folks are just joining us, what is Sattva?
Right. Yeah. And we did have an episode on Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And those are three qualities of the way that we experience our lives and we choose to live them. So we can live in a lethargic, kind of laid back, and some would say lazy way, which is tamas. Or we can also choose to be very rajasic, which is action oriented and social and out in the bustle of what some of this holiday season is bringing. But a sattvic way of being is more about being intentional and what you just mentioned, quiet and calm and connected. And often it's referred to as being connected to the divine nature of ourself and who we are. So all three of those are a result of how we bring ourselves into our lives. And so we, in some ways, can choose. We also have some natural inclinations that are part of who we are as a physical self. But it's about retreat. It's about creating an ambience of a quality life. And that all of a sudden becomes so specific to each of us because we know, the adage is what's someone's treasure, someone else's garbage, and vice versa. And that's true also with a Sattvic way of looking at the world. Some of us, if we are celebrating Christmas, we might think the tree is the best thing ever. And to others, it's a burden, it's a chore, and they just rather not. So it's how we approach these times, I think, that makes it Sattvic. So, what are some of the things that create that ambience for you?
Yeah, for me, it's about creating that hug, that feeling of comfort,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of light and warmth, because we're in that time of year where it gets dark at 4 o'clock or 4:30, and it feels like 9 o'clock, and you get into that mode of wanting to hibernate, which is natural. That's cyclically where we're at in the season is in that time of hibernation, that time of rest. So I know we're are here to talk about a Sattvic holiday, but there is a little bit of Tamasic vibes in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where there is some rest and inertia and it is a time, maybe, we think of Tamasic also being of decay. What do we need to release or let go of before
Mm-hmm.
we come into the new year? And we've got some time before that happens, but this is a time to rest. And it's also a very spiritually connected time. The veil can be very thin. It's a time to remember our ancestors and the role that they have played and continue to play in our lives. So I enjoy this time of year as a time of rest, reflection, focusing on some of my ancestral traditions, the foods I make around this time of year are connected to my grandmother and great grandmother and great great grandmother. So, those are some ways that I bring in the spiritual, the resting spiritual vibe of this season.
Right, and practices take on a little different flavor too. I've noticed, and I notice this every year, that when it starts to get a little darker earlier, like you mentioned, we get sleepy. That's what happens. If we're in tune with the cycles of the earth and the cosmos, we're going to respond to that. And that's healthy. That's a healthy way of being. And that's a whole nother topic about insomnia some people have. But just thinking about uh, creating the ambience of how we choose to live, what we choose to do, what activities we participate in. And I know you mentioned being a bit more tamasic, and that is part of it, and rajasic, because this holiday season, any holiday season, we've had Diwali already, which was a new year for the Hindus, and we have the new year in the Jewish tradition as well already. And so we are staggered. And if we look at all of those, we could celebrate a new year frequently in this time of the calendar. But in some ways, what you said about leaning into the Tamasic way of being and retreating and reflecting and having quiet moments. This is a time where we may want to uh, retreat back or create space for some of the things we define as hobbies, you know, things that we choose to do. Well, maybe we have traditional things we do in the winter. I know some people create a book list, and their winter is to get through those books and read. Others are knitters or crocheters or quilt makers, if you look at some of those. And then we have writers and musicians. A few friends of mine who are musicians say the winter is the best time for them to get ideas and begin to compose music. Same thing with artists. And it seems like even though the actual daylight is shorter, and we put all these brilliant lights out, and in Diwali we have the diyas out with the flames, and there are so many things that we do to bring the light back into our life, but it's the internal light that we're honoring, and it gives us an opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to have an early dinner, and then I'll have a longer evening. And when those longer evenings start to occur, suddenly there's time. It does something, it stretches the way we perceive our time. The day may feel a little more chaotic and short because the daylight is shorter, but the evenings can be luxurious. And really, we can take time for ourselves. So, bringing in that tamasic quality is, I think, spot on for the holidays. We get an opportunity to have a few weeks to do that.
And for me, my one of my hobbies that I pick up, and it's not really a hobby, but one of the practices I pick up in this season is I make yogi tea about once a week, put a big pot on my stove and fill it with cloves and cardamom and peppercorn and cinnamon and all the good things that you put into yogi tea, your ginger, and it makes the house smell so good. And I have my tea base for a good week. And in the morning, I can wake up before the sun rises, turn on my tree and my lights, and have my yogi tea. And it's just such a comforting way to start the day.
It's lovely.
My other hobby this time of year is, well, we near the holiday season is baked goods, baking goods for my family and our gatherings and honoring my grandmothers and great grandmothers and that tradition. I typically make, we call them hill cookies. They're kind of like pie cookies, but they're my great grandma's hill cookies. And every year I make them, I think, you're like, oh, I love these. These are so great. And then you remember the labor of that goes into them and that
Mm-hmm.
it's such a labor of love, the time that goes into, making you chop the dates and the nuts and you put those on the stove and you make your dough and then you assemble everything, you make these little pies. But having those over the next few weeks with my tea or coffee in the morning is that experience that you're just like, oh yeah, that's you forget. It's one of those things that it's not in your life daily, so you really appreciate those moments when you have them this time of year. It's very, when you lean into those rituals that bring you closer to your ancestors, to, yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very comforting, to me, it's very soothing to the nervous system.
Yeah. And we need those times out. It does, I'll just say it doesn't really matter what holiday anyone participates in and celebrates, and the quality of the holiday. You mentioned gathering with family and friends and spending time. So suddenly I think, well, that's the Rajasic quality. So maybe part of a Sattvic holiday is to create unity with the other two, tamas
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
rajas. And it becomes a unified experience where we can experience a time of just doing nothing. That tamasic quality, just doing nothing, or bringing it down to such a simple focus like watching snowflakes fall. And then spending time with people that we care about and love and share that. And spending time with the special pies and teas and fragrances and other things that we bring into our lives during this time. I find myself sometimes thinking when the holiday season is, let's say, over, everyone has that, okay, it's over, now we move on, get back to regular life. I don't know about that, but that seems to be part of the way it works as well in our society. So when we get to that point, I think, I wonder why I don't do this every day, 365 days a year. And like everything, it begins to fade and we merge ourselves back into our what we call daily life. But I think there's something about holding certain things like your are they pillow cookies or the little pies you just talked about? Holding those out for a special moment and not allowing them to become a daily thing, because being able to dive deep into the specialness of it is part of that celebration.
Mhm. Mhm. You know, I grew up in a very fundamental
Hmm.
Christian church. I know I've mentioned that before,
Yeah.
with very little fanfare, very little ritual. Um, but my grandmother, my Oma, was Lutheran in her practices. And around this time of year, I would go to the midnight, the candlelight service with
Hmm.
her. Um, she would have her Advent wreath and some other traditions that were, to me, having grown up in a very austere, uh, non-ceremonial faith,
Hmm.
those rituals were so magical to me.
Right. A lot of
And
energy there. Hmm.
mhm. And I loved going to the Lutheran church and I loved sitting through the liturgy and, the liturgical services. And that ritual felt very rich to me.
Hmm.
But I notice when we are in that environment regularly, it becomes rote.
Yes. Maybe that's what
And
I was
you
trying to
lose that
say. Yes.
magic of the ritual.
Hmm.
And I think in Western culture, we've lost touch with, and I think but perhaps it's just me, I think of evolution. Are we really evolving as a culture and society, or just when you evolve, do you start to see things differently? That's a question for another
That's a great topic. Yeah, if
another
somebody
time.
latched on to that when they were listening to what you just said, and it sounds like something that you resonate with, put it in the comments, and that will be a placeholder for us to get back to and put it into a podcast
Right.
real soon. Yeah.
Because that's a whole nother I could go. Yeah, I would love to talk about, are we able to shift collective consciousness or are we only shifting ourselves? But I digress. But it seems that we've lost touch with the the magic of ritual,
Hmm.
and cultivating ritual in your life is just about being intentional. Where do you put your intention? Worship is just a word that means what do we find valuable? what do we find worthy of our attention? What is worth our intention? So this is a very magical time of year because there's more ritual involved in it that we all kind of have normalized in this
Yeah.
culture. And yet it comes once a year. So it has that magical feel to it. And that makes it feel very sattvic, very spiritually connected. And it is. It's a time where we all come together and agree that, that we can come together in love, that there's hope for the future. We come together to celebrate the idea of peace on earth.
Mhm.
And how we carry that forward in our day-to-day lives and throughout the year can, it evolves and changes because the energy changes and shifts throughout the year. But there's something about this time of year, it's just a feeling like no other.
And that's another quality of sattvic living, is to be divinely connected with the cycles of the planet that we're on and the cosmos. And I'll save the astrological thing for another day, probably solstice, when we talk about that. But when we start thinking about, when do we sleep? When do we wake up? How do we do that in reference to what's happening with the sun and our planet's relationship? And we look to the other creatures on Earth. What's happening with them? And they're all, or have been, now they are, hibernating, or at least, staying home in whatever warm nests they have. And I'm always, and I'll say, awed by the fact that there are living creatures that year after year prepare, reproduce, have their families, make it through winter without a heating system like we have, make it through summer without air conditioning. And it really points out how isolated our physical bodies and our spiritual selves have become from being part of what happens on this planet in a cyclic way and a sustainable way. So, getting close to nature and feeling what you mentioned, that sense of hibernation, and what I mentioned is it gets dark early, and you mentioned about 4 o'clock. So I'm thinking about sleep, fairly soon after that. Earlier, much earlier, a couple hours even earlier than I would in the summertime. So being sattvic is also about being connected to nature
Mhm.
and living that connection, not avoiding it or, separating from it, but embracing as much of it as we can in our lives. There, we have other obligations. We get up, we go to work, we come home, we have families. We have all those things, the rajasic things that happen. But we can stay connected to the natural cycles of the planet
And
in
yet
some ways.
there's that other side of, I know a lot of people struggle with SAD, seasonal affective
Yes.
disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And this can be a very difficult time of year. I recall when I lived in China, that was the first, I used to kind of be affected seasonally as well.
Mm-hmm.
Feel a little, oh, stuck. Um, because if we
Very
push
Masic.
against right. If we push against the natural cycles of the earth, and we're talking, of course, here in the Northern Hemisphere. So if you're listening from Australia right now, this is going to be a bit of a different world for you. So,
Right.
but what we're experiencing here in our Northern Hemisphere, if we push against this cycle or don't lean into it,
Mm-hmm.
it can create a lot of, yeah, different emotions that aren't so warm and fuzzy and cozy.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we talk about, being Sattvic, I think it is, like you said, that balance of finding, okay, where's that balance between rest and activity? Where's that connection? And I just recall when I lived in China for several years, at that time I was not a big fan of winter. I was like, oh, here comes winter again. It's those dark months. So it's so cold. Oh, I just was not into it. Maybe I even got a little depressed from time to time. And in China, I was just amazed when winter rolled around and the activities did not stop.
Right.
And there was a lot, the lights were out in the city. You wear your underclothes and you put on your outerwear and your face mask to keep your face warm. You bundle up and you go out in the park, and people would be dancing and, you know, t- playing Tai Chi in the park, as they say, war, play. It was always funny, the word play. You play
Mm-hmm.
Tai Chi, you play this, you play
Mm-hmm.
that, you play dancing. And the activities really brought up my spirit, lifted my spirits, and it taught me you don't have to just always stay in and snuggle down, which is great, but there is balance in that energy. So, it's about, like you said, that unification, the balancing of the energy. So to me, creating that Sattvic spirit or that Sattvic energy around this time is knowing it is about unification or balance between those energies and doing what feels right and connecting with yourself and listening to your body and what it's telling you, and not pushing yourself to go out and get things done. If it's wow, I'd really like to stay in and snuggle up with a cup of tea and a good book, or, sit down and work on this sewing project that I haven't gotten to in a year. That's me, by the way. Um,
And me, I will put myself in that space. Mm-hmm.
finally got all my materials. It took me a year to gather all the materials, but I've got them and I'm going to get started on it. Um, but yeah, I think it's about that balance of those energies that can really take us to that more sattvic, elevated spiritual place, which this is supported, I think, by this
When you said
here.
play Tai Chi, that just opened up a whole way of thinking that I hadn't really thought about before. And the difference between how we talk about working at our practices, working at meditation, working, we use the word work.
Mhm.
And not to say you can't have sattvic qualities in work, you can, they're there. But taking it over here and calling it play just has a whole nother ambience and makes it so much easier for it to be sattvic. So the choice of words that we use, and I think I'm going to spend a little time with that. And every time I want to say the word work and we'll see how long I can support this, I might try to do some self editing and throw in the word play and see how that fits. Because when you talked about playing at Tai Chi, and I started thinking about, well, playing at work, playing
Mhm.
at walking,
Chores.
playing at
Yeah.
meditation, it. It doesn't give it a superficial quality. It actually brings in some depth of joy, and that, for no other way to describe it, that's Sattvic way of being here in our
Yeah.
lives.
It's having
Thank
fun
you.
while you do things, whether it's, we've talked about being here in that space, like be here now. When you're stirring the pot, stir the pot. When you're doing the dishes, do the dishes. but the adding an element of play, put on the music, dance around the house. Sometimes,
Hmm.
I'm having a whole dance party in here while I'm just doing daily chores. It just depends on what, and it's not always based off of what I feel, but what the feeling I want to create.
Exactly, I agree with that. Yes, yes, because of we wait for it to arrive. Sometimes we get stuck. And so being able to willfully choose it and bring it into our lives makes a difference, I think.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
spot
Yeah,
on.
and there's a balance of being able to just say, yes, today is a day where I rot on the couch in that tamasic energy of decay and inertia. And there are times when I might, I know, and this is, I think, what's important is it's just tuning into yourself and
Hmm.
knowing when that time is up. Because if it, as again, everything's on that spectrum, if I go too far down that path and all I'm doing is lying on the couch, and eventually I start to really not feel good in my body and in my head. And even though I don't feel like it, I know that getting up and moving around and, getting active and bringing more rajasic energy into my
Hmm.
life is going to make me feel better. Um, so yeah, I think I mean, we've talked about that before, is the interplay of those. They're always interacting, they're always interplaying in at different levels in our lives. And it's about turning inward, tuning in, and recognizing what that balance is for you in that moment that's going to elevate you to that more sattvic level at any given time.
Hmm. So, regardless of whatever we happen to have in our lives that is a holiday that we celebrate or when it occurs, just some thoughts about ways to, as you mentioned early when we first got on, the chaos of the rushing around and the last minute this and that, to make it less of an obligation and more of whatever it is that's inside each of us that connects us to that sense of lightness and nature, our being, ourself, and our spirit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which this reminds me to avoid avoid a buildup of rajasic energy that gets overwhelming. I need to go get my ingredients for schnitzbrot, which I said I would make this year. That's another traditional bread that I have not made for many years. And my dad's mom, my grandma, would make that. And so that's something I committed to making this year, and I'm excited about it. But this is a good reminder to get started now and go get a few things because it only has like 1,000 ingredients that are
Mhm.
difficult to find. So I'm gonna have to get
Mhm.
started now to avoid getting overwhelmed. And yeah, getting into that state of feeling pressured and just be able to enjoy that experience because I
Yes,
am
so it's
really
like a
looking
treasure
forward to it.
hunt. You're on
Yeah.
a treasure hunt to find all the ingredients. It's a play, and playful. Hmm.
Yep. Yes. So I'm looking forward to that. So, to our listeners, drop a comment or let us know
Yes.
what you're doing this holiday season, what brings you peace and joy and contentment, what calms your nervous system in the chaos. Let us know. We'd love to hear what you have to say and share it forward.
Yes, and keep breathing.
Mhm.
Always keep breathing.
And stay safe.
Hmm.
Don't go out if you don't have to, and stay warm and snuggly.
Yes. Be sure to like and subscribe. In addition to dropping a comment, we would love to continue to hear what you have to say. So thank you for being here today.
That's that numb.
Namaste.